Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Bar Society podcast. Today, Melina will be interviewing Samantha Shahriar, an alumni of the University of Aberdeen. Ms Shahriar is a bar course student who is expected to be called to the bar next year. She will talk about her journey to the bar, providing great advice to aspiring barristers. We hope you enjoy.
Good afternoon, Ms Shahriar. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us today. We're very excited to have you on our first ever episode. We have a lot of questions to ask you, so without further ado, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So when did you attend the University of Aberdeen? Which honours courses did you pick and did you enjoy them?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I just wanted to say how great it is that you have all started this wonderful society. I'm sure it will help a lot of students now and in the future. So for a bit about me, I attended Aberdeen from 2015 to 2019. So I graduated in 2019. I did mainly the honours courses that I did were quite international law heavy. So I did international human rights law. I did international law, a time of challenges, and the use of force in international law. Alongside that, I also did my honours course in administrative law and a course called Voluntary Scotland, which I'm not sure runs anymore, but it focuses on Scottish charities, clubs, community organisations and unincorporated associations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm actually taking that next semester.
Who's taking that course now? Because it was Dougie Bain that did it for us, but I'm sure that was his last time.
No, it's Douglas as well.
Oh, great. I thought he'd retired. Good to know that he's still about.
Yeah.
No, it was a really good course and I enjoyed all of them. I thought the teaching was very good. That the way it was assessed worked for me as well. And it sort of propped me up to do what I wanted to do in the future with regards to my master's degree.
We also know that you've achieved a first class degree, which is absolutely amazing. And I'm sure many students are aspiring to achieve that. Do you have any tips on how to achieve a first class degree?
Sure. Well, I think from the outset, I'll make clear that every student has their own way of learning. I don't think in first year and second year I really knew what I was doing. I was much like most students where I was just going out a lot, not turning up to any lectures or seminars, sort of doing my thing. But when it came to obviously third and fourth year, I knuckled down a bit and I knew that, you know, these years were the years that really mattered. And so I worked towards that. But I guess my first tip would be to not only work hard, but be strategic. So if you're a second year student going into third year and you're, you know, due to pick your honours courses, I would say to first of all, obviously pick a course that you're interested in, but also see what the assessment style is. So if it's a course that's quite is 100% exam and you know that you're not great under exam conditions, perhaps pick a course that focuses more on essays. Secondly, I'd say to have a, you know, as everyone knows, have a structured routine and timetable and try to stick to it. So prepare good notes from the outset, prepare good notes from the start, so you don't have to rush to make good notes later on when it comes to actually revising the course. And consolidate what you've learned after lectures. That way you can have time to enjoy your weekends too. So have some sort of routine in place. And my biggest piece of advice would be to really liaise with your lecturers and your tutors in those courses, not only because they will serve as your academic references in the future, which you will need if you're applying for pupillage, mini pupillage or bar course scholarships, but also because they'll give you an insight, a one-on-one insight into what it is that they're looking for. So I remember for quite a few of my courses, actually, even before the essay was set, I would try and, you know, organise a meeting with them to sort of gauge what it was that they were looking for in terms of structure, because structure is such a big thing in law, legal essays, drafting, whatever it is, but in terms of style and substance. And even after I got results for an essay, whether I did well or I didn't do that well, I'd still have a follow-up meeting with them to ask them how I could improve. And obviously that feedback can be used towards exams and addressing gaps of knowledge and towards further assessments and other courses. So I think those are my three big bits of advice.
Wow, thank you so much. Definitely will be helpful for all of us, and I'm going to take that on board as well. Can you tell us a little about the work you have completed or are completing after Aberdeen?
Right after Aberdeen, I started my Masters in Public International Law at UCL. After I finished my Masters, I got a job as a judicial assistant at the Court of Appeal. I worked directly under Lord Justice Lewis, who specialises in public law. And as of a week, I have been a bar course student at City University. So I finished my judicial assistantship in July of this year. So I've just started my bar course.
Oh wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
So what made you want to study an LLM at UCL?
So there are several reasons why I wanted to study at UCL. First being that as a Londoner, it was an opportunity for me to go back home. But the main reason I would say is that aside from its world-class reputation in law and the amount of resources and facilities it has, I really wanted to do a specialist LLM in international law to build up on what I had learned at Aberdeen. And at UCL, they offered quite specific niche courses relating to international law, such as decolonizing international law. And I thought that courses like that would help me improve on my skills in critical legal analysis and observe and see the law from a different perspective that I hadn't been exposed to whilst I was at Aberdeen. So yeah, I guess that's why UCL really ticked all the boxes for me.
Oh, and you mentioned you chose City as your bar course provider.
Yes.
Why did you choose City?
Varies for quite a few people. There in London, especially, there are 4 bar course providers at City, BPP Law, University of Law, and there is the new ICA course as well that's administered by King's College. I chose City because it was a strategic, firstly, because the fee that they were offering ended up being the cheapest when I factored in my bar course scholarship. And also they have fantastic pro bono opportunities too, whether that be the refugee law clinic that they have or affiliations with the free representation unit. They have so many pro bono opportunities in order for you to upskill yourself. And they're also the oldest bar course provider. So they have an established track record and reputation of producing successful pupillage applicants. So, you know, those reasons, and it's near where I live. So those reasons together made City the perfect choice for me.
In general, then, why did you want to pursue a career at the bar?
Yeah, so I think there are 3 reasons for that. The first being that I mainly, as someone that's interested in public law, specifically civil liberties and human rights within public law, I wanted to have the opportunity to support vulnerable people through difficult times. And you have underrepresented groups or groups with less help and understanding of the legal system. It can be quite a complicated process. So I wanted to be that person that helped them, you know, held their hand through that process, but more importantly, actually be their voice in court, which solicitors can't do. The second reason is the fact that I'm drawn to the intellectual challenge of being a barrister. So the way in which you have to conceive and formulate arguments and think creatively and on the spot to overcome, you know, judicial interventions is terrifying, but something that I also find exciting if I can sort of neaten that up. And the third reason is that as a barrister, you have greater control over your career than a solicitor would, for example. So you can pursue other projects. As someone that's interested in international law, I can, you know, I can set aside time to research areas of international law, continue publishing things. So that sort of degree of flexibility and, you know, that choice of what kind of cases you can take on is also something that made the bar quite appealing to me.
You are also a Gray's Inn scholar, which is fantastic. Why did you decide on Gray's Inn, and do you have any tips for students applying for a scholarship this year?
Yes, so for most of the Inns of Court scholarship application process is now open, and I believe the deadline for most of them will also be early November. So I'll start off with the first part of your question, why Gray's Inn? So with Gray's Inn, it's a very small Inns of Court, and I felt that the atmosphere was very collegiate there. being of small inns of court, there's likely for you to bump into people and have better, more sort of focused networking opportunities. On top of that as well, being the smallest inn, Gray's Inn offers the sort of largest scholarship packages often. Lincoln's Inn and Gray's Inn offer sometimes the largest scholarship packages. So I thought that if I got through with Gray's Inn, I would get sort of a very generous award, which luckily I did. So yeah, those are the reasons why I really applied to Gray's. And they have a fantastic mentorship scheme as well, where you can be mentored by barristers throughout your journey. Even when you're a junior barrister as well, you can be mentored by them. In terms of my tips for a scholarship to become a successful applicant, it's very important with the paper application, whether you're applying to, actually just before I get into that, I'll make it clear, Inner Temple and Middle Temple, although they require you to submit an application, they interview everyone. Whereas Lincoln's Inn and Gray's Inn, you have to do an application with them, and then they do a paper sift, and then they invite some people for interview. So that's something to bear in mind. I'll speak with regards to the application itself for those that might be interested in applying at Gray's or Lincoln's. It's very important to start drafting your application from now, and to keep on checking your application either yourself or through other people. The best way is to get in touch with a barrister or a Gray's Inn or Lincoln's Inn scholar through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is perfect for that if you do have LinkedIn, or even legal Twitter. And when you're actually writing your application, to make sure that you use something called the STAR format, which is where you describe the situation, the task that you did, the action, and the result of that. So that keeps everything very clear, depending on the question, of course. So to use the STAR format, and when you're talking about your experiences, to not just talk about your experiences, but what you actually learned from them too. So I think those are probably my key tips for the scholarship application itself.
Do you have any tips for the interview process? Like, what kind of questions did they ask you, how to respond?
Sure. So with the interview, what they usually do is 10 to 15 actually minutes before you go in, they give you a list of questions. It's usually 4 questions, and they're around sort of common sort of legal debates or topics. And you're meant to come up with arguments. You're meant to argue a side, essentially. So my top tip for that is to not only be aware of all the legal debates that are going on at the minute. And for me, what I personally did, I was a bit OTT, and I created a huge document with all the topical legal debates that are going on right now, whether it's with COVID or, the Human Rights Act, or, protesters' bills, or, whatever it is. I wrote arguments under each topic for and against. And in the interview, they usually, even if you've prepared arguments for that topic in favour of that argument, they may turn around and say to you, okay, give us your arguments against. So it's really important when you're prepping for that to write arguments for and against. And it doesn't have to be very legalistic. It can just be 3 points. And you just basically batter off those 3 points to them, but always signposts. So you'll say, I'm arguing in favour of X. My first point is X. Second point is Y. Third point is Z. And then they may interrupt you in between, and you just think on the spot and try to be as clear as possible. So aside from that sort of legal question, they'll ask you standard competency questions like, why do you want to be a barrister? What have you done to understand what a career at the bar entails? And also your motivations. And they may ask you questions based on your application, so experiences that you've listed in your application. And they'll ask you motivation and resilience questions too. So if there has been ever a time in your life where you've had to overcome some sort of experience, how you overcame it and what you learned from that experience. So it's a lot about competencies, academic merit and potential, and resilience.
And how long would you say before your interview did you start prepping for the interview? Is it after you realised that you'd actually get through to the interview?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the time scale. I think we found out that we'd got an interview possibly February time, and the interview started in March. So at that time, I was also doing my job as a judicial assistant, so I was quite busy, but I tried to prep as soon as possible. And with that prep, I would really recommend, again, looking through your application, seeing what points you've made there or experiences that you've listed, that anything is fair game. Anything that you have on your application is could be picked up in the interview. And to also just prepare for general competency questions and motivation and resilience questions.
You also mentioned that you were a judicial assistant. How did you find the application process for this, and what does the day-to-day life of a JA look like?
So the application process for the JA job was twofold. So because it's a civil service job, it was advertised on the Ministry of Justice's, job portal, and the questions they asked were quite sort of bog standard civil service questions. So you have to make sure that you answer those questions in a STAR format, so situation, task, action, and result. And those questions are based on the key sort of behaviours that they're looking for. So the civil service have a document where they list all the behaviours and attributes that they want from a civil servant. So I would suggest looking at that too. And in the application as well, it lists that behaviour or that competency that they want. Obviously, the application, I just answered it using all the experiences that I had, using that STAR format. And then I was invited to an interview. At the interview, I was presented with a couple of questions. The main question that they asked you was whether or not, if there was a Court of Appeal decision that you disagreed with and why. So always prepare for those kind of questions. They may ask you to disagree or agree with a Court of Appeal decision and go through the legal framework as to why you feel the way that you do. On top of that as well, they'll ask you standard strength-based competency questions, how you manage your time, whether you've dealt with a large volume of documents, things like that. So it is intimidating because it is a judge, a Lord of Appeal that interviews you. Mine was Lord Justice Bean, and alongside him was Master Marie Bancroft, who's also a judge as well. It can be intimidating, but I think if you prepare well, you can anyone can do well in it, I think.
What were some of the benefits and challenges of your job as a judicial assistant?
Benefit-wise, it really builds your confidence, because as a judicial assistant, you have to prepare bench memoranda for your supervising judge and the other judges that are sitting on the Constitution. And in that sense, in that bench memoranda, you not only have to be very good at legal research and, summarise the position of the appellant as well as the position of the respondent, but you also have to give your own merits. You also have to give your own opinion on the merits of a case. So I would go in and I would write down my opinions on whether I think a case should be advanced or not. And then in person, I would have that discussion with my judge. And at first that was very intimidating and very daunting. But soon you realise how you're having sort of early practice in sort of debating with the judge, or convincing or persuading a judge towards your position. And it is a safe space, irrespective of how intimidating it may seem. So that was one of the benefits. The other benefits were the other JAs, the people that you meet. A lot of them are already barristers, a lot of them have already got pupillage, a lot of them are in the same stage as you. So you have that networking ability where you can get people to check your applications. There's an understanding between all of you that we're all going through this together. It's the same experience. There's a lot of empathy and compassion. So that was probably another highlight, a benefit of being a JA. Everyone's sort of in the same boat as you, or has been through what you have been through. In terms of challenges, I think the main challenge was the fact that many parties are unrepresented. So you get what is called litigants in person. So they represent themselves. So a lot of the papers that they submit are, they're high in volume and they're not coherent, they're disorganized, and the arguments that they're making aren't always very clear. And as a JA, your job is to sort of pick out their arguments and present it in a digestible way to the judge as a refresh. So sometimes it was often hard to sort of navigate what it was that these litigants in person were saying and deal with those high volumes of documents. And the other thing that I found quite challenging at times was to research new areas of law that I had probably done in first or second year, but had completely forgotten about. So I had to start from scratch in some instances, but you get used to it. You get used to doing all of that. So It's just, and you can get help from other JAs who know about those areas of law and get guidance from them on where to start. And your judge too. Your judge can point you in the right direction.
Wow, that's really interesting. I don't think many people would even know what a JA is.
Yeah, I think the JA scheme is quite popular in England and Wales. Really fantastic experience. You learn a lot, you improve in your legal research skills, you improve networking wise, which I'm not great at, but you improve there. And you get a lot of confidence, you know, talking to your judge, having them mentor you, support you, but also being able to persuade them on a point of law they hadn't considered is quite a rewarding experience. So yeah, I recommend anyone and everyone to apply if they can.
It really helps with pupillage and mini pupillage applications as well, when you have to, you know, give examples of advocacy and persuasion.
Yeah, and even cases that you've seen. So as a JA, I'd obviously have to go to hearings of cases that I'd dealt with, and bear in mind in the Court of Appeal you have a lot of very, very interesting cases. My last one was actually the start of the Rwanda appeal, so you get to see a lot of really, really important stuff that's happening. But yes, you get to see barristers at the top of their game present their arguments, and you get to learn a lot from that too. And in mini pupillage applications and pupillage applications, you can say that, oh, I followed this case and I saw this barrister and I was really impressed with his style of advocacy, whatever it is, and, you know, tailor your application based on a barrister that you've seen in court. Yeah, it's a great experience.
On that note, do you have any other tips for mini pupillage applications, and how do you make your sort of CV stand out?
Yeah, so for mini pupillage applications, first I would start off by understanding what kind of area of law what kind of area of law you're interested in. Do you want to join the public bar, the family bar, the commercial bar, a criminal bar, whatever it is? Try and narrow that down. If you don't know, that's fine, but make a list of chambers that you're interested in and see when their deadlines are. And then also see what their application requires. So some chambers require a CV and a cover letter. Some have their own application form and they want you to attach a CV, or some just have an application form. Whatever it is, get that straightened in your head. Never ever use a generic template. Never ever do that. Always try to tailor your applications to that specific chambers, because they know, they can pick up on that. And they're so experienced and they read so many applications, hundreds and hundreds of mini pupillage applications, that they can pick up on the fine nuances. In order to understand those differences between chambers and those nuances, you know, use Chambers Guide, Legal 500, Legal Cheek helps as well to understand which practice areas it is that they do focus on. So sometimes a common misconception is, if on a chamber's website they say that they do public international law and you're interested in public international law, you start writing about public international law in your application. That's a mistake, because they might just have one barrister that does public international law, but most of their work may be somewhere else. So make sure to clarify that. Make sure to tailor your application to the actual practice areas that bring in most of the work for them. It's also good to distinguish or understand, at least in your head, whether they do claimant work or defendant work, what the split is. So if you're someone that wants to do mainly claimant work and maybe not represent the government, for example, if we're talking in a public law context, make sure that the chambers you're applying to does do mainly claimant work and not defendant work. And if they do defendant work, make sure to tailor your application or phrase yourself in a way that shows that you're interested in seeing how to represent public authorities. That's what I would say would be the main thing in terms of applications. And also, you have to keep on checking your applications and make sure other people check your applications 2, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever it is. Just make sure you keep on checking your applications and fine-tuning them and getting help from others too with that. And with regards to your CV, again, it depends on what kind of area of law you're interested in. But one thing I think that helped me stand out was all the pro bono stuff that I did throughout my undergrad. So during your summer holidays, I would recommend, again, looking for pro bono opportunities. So when I would come back to London for my summer holidays, I would volunteer at legal clinics or at charities, get pro bono experience through that. So whatever you can get, show that paper trail, show that sort of demonstrated commitment that you have to whatever area of law it is that you're interested in.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly useful. I love useful tips.
Yeah, a lot of info.
What is one thing you wish you knew before pursuing a career at the bar?
One thing that I wish I knew was what it actually meant to be self-employed as a barrister. So obviously most barristers are self-employed. There are a few that are a part of the employed bar where they work in-house or for the government, but the majority are self-employed. And as a self-employed barrister, it's the practical things. So if you want to buy a house, there may be slight complications with getting a mortgage because you're self-employed, or you need to have a accountant who knows how to do taxes that's specific for a barrister. You know, these little practical things I wish I'd known beforehand in order to adjust my plans in a certain way. But yeah, I think it really was the practical side of what it entails to be a self-employed barrister that would have helped having knowledge on.
But I know so many barristers who have done mini pupilages, and they've just said it doesn't highlight sort of everything about the bar.
Yeah.
A snippet.
Yeah, mini pupilages does give you a snippet. That's why it's important that because mini pupilages are usually 2 days to 5 days, and you're either following someone around or you're set a task and you're meant to do that task, and then they give you feedback on that. But it's important during your mini pupilages to talk to if you have a nice supervisor, to talk to your mini pupil supervisor and get advice from them and ask them these questions like, oh, so you know, how does money work? You know, what are your policies when it comes to say if you're someone that wants to have children in the future, what's your policy on paying rent while someone is pregnant or on maternity leave? Does one still have to pay, because you have to pay rent obviously for your room at Chambers? So these little specifics are good to know before you sort of embark or commit yourself to that path, whether it is something that you'd be comfortable with. Even with regards to your salary, you don't necessarily have, especially as a junior barrister, you don't have a fixed salary every month. So as a pupil, you have a fixed yearly salary, but after that, the money that you get depends on when you finish your work. So say you've been asked to write an opinion for a solicitor. Once that work is done in 3 months, you get paid for that in 3 months' time. So it's these little things, these little planning things that I think are really important for people to know on the financial side, at least.
I had no idea you had to pay to rent your room.
Yeah, you have to pay Chambers. So you're a tenant. So after pupillage, you become, if they decide to keep you on, you become a tenant. As a tenant, yeah, you're a tenant there, so you have to pay a cut of your salary goes to maintaining your room, I guess, at Chambers.
Lastly, what would you say if you could give one piece of advice to students wanting to pursue a career at the bar?
The main piece of advice is, obviously, if you are pursuing this career choice, I think everyone probably here knows that you have to be quite strong and resilient. Aside from being strong and resilient, it's important in your head to be content with yourself, because at the bar, and I think being a lawyer in general, but specifically at the bar, imposter syndrome will inevitably creep in. But it's important not to compare yourself to other people. Yes, get inspiration from other people, get guidance from other people, see what other people are doing right and address those gaps in yourself, but not to directly compare yourself to other people. And have faith in the process, trust your journey. There is no right or wrong way of pursuing this career. Many people that become barristers, most people that are barristers have had second careers or in their late 20s, early 30s. So don't feel disheartened if you don't get a mini pupillage straight away, or if you don't get a pupillage straight away. You can do plenty of things in the meantime to upskill yourself, to get those interviews, to get those bits of experience. There's no age limit or time. At a last pupillage that I did recently, the pupil barrister was a surgeon for 10 years.
Wow.
Before he changed his career path. There was someone that I knew that maybe hadn't done that well academically, but spent a lot of time getting lots and lots of experience, getting lots and lots of skills, and applied, and in their third round were finally successful for pupillage. So it's important to be, obviously academics and things like that are very, very important for pupillage. So is experience, but don't directly compare yourself to other people. Trust the process, trust your journey, and just make sure whatever time it is that you do have, to use it as productively as possible. Everything you do should gear up to getting that pupillage.
Thank you so much. This has been incredibly useful and incredibly informative.
Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at BarSocABDN and on Facebook at Bar Society Aberdeen to stay up to date on upcoming episodes of our podcast.